Greetings, friends, and welcome back to the Musings from the Mount podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Carenza. This year, 2025, has been marked by intense polarization. And as we broadcast from Meditation Mount, which is both a physical place and a community that extends through the internet and physically here in Ojai, California, we face a real challenge. How do you avoid alienating half your audience if and when you were to take a political stance? The question of how do you maintain inclusivity without becoming indifferent? So this conversation examines what spiritual neutrality actually means. It's not about staying silent or uninvolved, but it's more about understanding that the two poles we see fighting are actually necessary partners in creation. We also look at the difference between nonpartisanship and apathy, and what it means to stand for principles without identifying with a particular party. So we hope this conversation might help you to navigate your own relationships with family and friends across the various political divides, or at the very least, give you a different way of thinking about the tension that we're all feeling right now. We hope you enjoy the episode. And if you do enjoy this podcast, please consider going to meditationmount.org and donating. Your donation, it helps us to bring you this podcast, as well as all the other programs the Mount produces, both today and in the future. We are incredibly grateful and honored by your support. Okay, back to the podcast. One of the things about 2025, it's marked by intense polarization. I think you could call that pretty easily. And when you are part of a community and running a place, a spiritual center, Meditation Mount, where people come physically, and they also come spiritually, whether it's through the internet or listening to this podcast, or if you're in fellowship as someone that is studying and reading the Alice Bailey books or the Agni Yoga books, you're part of this community. And as people that actually run a physical place and also sort of run a spiritual space, we occupy and help foster and run a spiritual community. How do you avoid alienating half your audience or half of your community if you end up getting yourself aligned with a particular political party or person, or even being against a certain political party or person? So this is kind of an interesting thing, because one of the main things I think, when we consider politics and the role of the spiritual center or the real spiritual life, is you run the risk of creating insiders and outsiders.
Yes, exactly. This is the challenge, Joey. When you talked about people having difference of opinions and things like that, you often hear the phrase, we're poles apart. Well, let's look at that as the two poles that need to be in dynamic relationship with each other to create. So the two poles are needed in order to create something. The third point, which is a new awareness. We're told that consciousness is born out of the relationship between two things. And if you go back to Agni Yoga and the whole notion of the cosmic magnet, the whole manifested world is a result of the dynamic communion and interplay between the two poles of the cosmic magnet, the divine feminine, the divine masculine, whatever you want to name it. Therefore, when you are inside the field of manifestation, when you're inside the manifested world, it's easy to get caught up in the polarization, not knowing or forgetting that polarization is an aspect of creation. You talked about, the Tibetan, the Alice Bailey books. In the Alice Bailey books, there is a description of how life moves forward, which I've always appreciated. And it's this image of two poles, okay? You've got positive and negative, whatever you want to say. And the space between them comes alive when they realize their differences. it's called polarization. So the first stage is polarization, where you actually get polarized. The problem is when you don't move beyond polarization. What happens when you hold the polarized relationship, increased tension happens because it builds up. And then that tension reaches a point where it's either a breakthrough or a breakdown. And it's said that when you reach that point, it's called crisis. So you've got polarization, then you've got this intensification, which is tension. Intense. It's a tension. And then that produces crisis. At the crisis point, the next stage is called release or sweep. It moves forward. Either it lifts and ascends, and the two poles meet at a higher point of synthesis, or the field collapses and degenerates into disorganized chaos, a disunified field, where the poles then become the protagonists or the antagonists in a battle, and therefore you get anarchy, which is a warring of the elements without any higher purpose. I remember back in the 60s when we were doing a lot of trying to liberate ourselves from a lot of the strictures that we saw all around us. There was a lot of rebellion. This is where we sort of occupied universes and did all these things to try and liberate. And there was a group of anarchists that showed up. And I remember the conversation I had with them once when they wanted to occupy a building. They just wanted to take over and just create chaos. They had no plan for a future state that was better than the current one. Their job was to tear it down. Now, if you just tear it down and clear a space, and if you don't then consecrate the field for the building of something new, the polarized field just becomes the battleground. You've got two armies on this field. Well, rather than two armies on a field, why not see it as two poles of the creative magnet? And the problem is when you have politics divided into two parties, people think that victory is one pole beating another pole. Rather than, you go back to America, and where the ideal of democracy is held. It's still not a realized fact. The whole quest for a more perfect union. What is a more perfect union? I could relate it to that point of synthesis where at the top of the triangle, the polarized elements meet. And so is politics really the deep intent of politics to reach a more perfect union? Or has it, if you like, degenerated into just a bar fight between two opposing belief systems and parties? Therefore, the polarization then becomes a fight between the poles, and where victory is seen to be one pole beating the other pole, rather than how do we reach a higher point, a deeper point, a more perfect union. So that's what's evoked with your opening question, Joey. So what for you comes next?
Well, for me, it's interesting to think about just what it means, because when you think about a spiritual center, for me, it kind of evokes sort of like a Switzerland kind of perspective. Like, you should be maintain neutrality, and but not indifference. And I think one of the things, there's a misconception that spiritual neutrality means political apathy.
Non-partisanship can be neutral. Neutrality doesn't mean I don't care, I've just taken my side out of the game. Neutrality says I will not take sides, i.e. the poles. And we've referred this to Arjuna on the battlefield and trying to figure out, am I supposed to kill my brothers and my uncles and my family on the other side? And then in the end, Krishna says, no, Arjuna, your task is to fight your own inner demons, to clear the field so that the truth can emerge. what you just pointed out, Joey, is we paint ourselves into a corner when we take sides. So here at Meditation Mount, our work is based on these three principles that we've named most podcasts, which is the principle of essential divinity, principle of goodwill, principle of unanimity. So we believe that inside of each person, each creature, each form of creation, there's the imprint of the creator, the spark of the creative mind of the original thinker. That means each one of us is a sacred expression, a microcosmic expression, a fractal of this one. Therefore, you can't take sides because we're all part of the one. We are the many expressions of the one. So what we have is this glorious differentiation of the one, not in opposition to each other, but in complement. We are complementary colors of the one. Now, when you take the principle of goodwill, which is the expression of love as a form of communication, love as the glue that holds all things together, then love also becomes the reason we're here is to give expression to love. Now, if you have two people that believe that this is how you express love, and the other person says, no, this is how you express love, you actually can have a fight over how you express love. But if you really come together and say, let's dance together and let our two approaches actually merge, and out of that comes a whole new understanding of what it means for the differences to dance together as a unified expression. And then the third principle, which is the principle of unanimity, which wraps the whole thing up together because it says we're part of one interdependent, unified field of life, this one matrix of life, that basically said that everything we do to another person, we do to ourselves. So therefore, if you have an enemy, whether it's a political enemy or an enemy, a national, two nations who see each other as enemies, two religious factions that see each other as enemies, that's a temporary and an unfortunate state of separation, of polarization, because we've forgotten that we are the many aspects of the one, seeking to recreate the one and find our way back to oneness. And the way you find your way back to oneness is not by killing off all the other parts and becoming, and the part that you are, becoming the one. That's domination. That's not unification. So I find it fascinating at the moment we've got nations that are thinking of themselves first. Our nation first. Well, that's fine if there's a so that we can contribute more fully to the well-being of the whole planet. But if it's just that, no, we've got the answer, we're right, and we're going to defend it, and us against them, I believe we're in a time of polarization where we do not see the connectivity. We do not understand the principle of unanimity, that we're all interconnected. We do not understand the principle of essential divinity, where each one of us is an outworking, an outpicturing of the one in its manifold expression. Or we understand the principle of goodwill and say that love is what holds us together. So what's the problem? If you don't live by principles, you live by the law of the jungle.
Yeah, that's a good point. But how does one escape the law of the jungle in the same way that even though we all are one, people get cancer, and like when you get cancer, do you do nothing because it's also a living thing?
Remember, cancer is the abnormal growth of one cell that seeks to multiply itself and take over the whole system. So we're seeing the rise of cancer because it reflects in physical form what we're doing psychologically and psychically to each other, where the part is trying to colonize the whole thing. And yes, you do. So what do you do? Do you do chemotherapy? Do you do holistic treatments? What you've got to do is to rein in that cancer cell that's sort of just rampaging and multiplying. You've got to bring it back into right proportion. You've got to have it find its place within the scheme of things. So what triggered this? Well, at the moment, if you don't have a sense of we are part of one whole, and wholeness is health, and the old English word for wholeness and health is hale, to be hale. Hale and hearty, it comes from the Scandinavian wholeness, heal, health. Therefore, if you're hale and hearty as an individual or as a nation, you have wholeness. So the whole thing of cancer is pointing out that we are not yet in a state of wholeness, or we don't have a more perfect union inside our collective body. Now, that's not an answer to how you deal with it. However, holding the principle of unanimity as a reality is one way of helping to cure cancer from the inside out, by bringing things back into right perspective.
Yeah.
Then you can do the treatments, whatever the treatment is.
Yeah.
But the thought form that holds the system in place has to be whole. And that's why it's so unfortunate now, where it's about one political party trying to beat out another and making the other wrong and the enemy. They both have shadow aspects. They both have good sides. They both have contributions. But it's politics. I've described it simply as the way we choose to live together and govern ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's a very important concept, because I think we tend to, in our sort of modern world, we've replaced spirituality with politics to some degree, because it activates the same part of the brain. It sort of invigorates the soul, and this, gives you that kind of spree and vigor that people used to get for their spiritual life, and so we sort of replaced it with almost like a sporting kind of thing, where it's like us against them, rather than looking at it from a perspective of trying to figure out the best way to pave the road, the best way to, pay the light bill,
And without getting too esoterically technical here, we go back to rays, the ray structure. So politics is a first ray activity. It has to do with the will and governance. Now, governance is how we choose to live together and govern ourselves. It's not that one has dominance and control over everything else. And that's how it's sort of become. So when we look at politics now, it's really a power game. It's not the right use of energy to create a healthy society in which we can all thrive. Because it's associated with the first ray of will and power, which is really the organizing around a common intent. If it's used by the lower self without any higher aspirations, it's just going to be, how can I make myself better and bigger than everyone else?
Yeah, I don't think in Agni Yoga, I think it's in Heart, kind of generally warns against the glamour of power.
Yeah.
And where it's become like you've turned it into just the game is to win more power.
Well, let's look at power just impersonally. What is power? Power is a quantum of energy that is required to carry out a task. So the reason the power exists in the universe is so that we have the energy to carry out the deep desire of the Creator. And within that power is also carried the purpose. So purpose and power go together. So if somebody has the purpose of taking over the world, they're going to misappropriate power. They're going to become a dictator. And at the moment, we've got small dictatorships around the world because different parts have said, we're in charge, or we rule the world. I'm speaking in general terms. I'm not pointing fingers at any one nation or any one political leader. I'm just saying this is a trend at the moment, because we haven't understood that power is simply divine energy that is needed to carry out the will of the Creator, the desire of the Creator. We've used it to fulfill our own partial desires or our own plans. And therefore, it doesn't serve the good of the whole. And I guess when our actions serve the good of the whole, we have a benevolent society. We have benevolent governance. At the moment, what we have is governance more as a domination. And so winning an election is, the color of our party is going to dominate the map.
Mm.
Red states, blue states. Oh, we won because there's more of our color on the map than your color. Mm-hmm. Does that create a more perfect union?
Mm. Well, I mean, I guess it begs the question, do the Alice Bailey teachings, do the transcendentalizations, Agni Yoga, does it provide the next step, the next alternative? Or does it provide, or is it, because I'm asking that question. I mean, I have my own views on that, but, I guess, how do you remain inclusive in a polarized world,
By not forgetting the three principles.
Mm-hmm.
By living principally.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you're, as you said earlier, indifferent. If I see somebody causing harm to somebody else, I will step in, mm-hmm. not to take sides, but to cease the causing of harm.
Mm. Right. Yeah, you have to stop the harm first before you can do anything else.
Exactly.
I also kind of see it as to use maybe a metaphor. If you're doing spiritual work, if you're on this path and you're trying to help other people, I think one of the best kind of things you can do is to try to be the clearest mirror possible, because you don't want to cloud that, a mirror doesn't take sides. A mirror just shows what's there. And I think that's part of, it's hard to do if you're aligning with one side, you're alienating the other side,
Well, it's interesting. If we go back to the principle of essential divinity, it really says we acknowledge the sovereignty of every unit or every aspect of the one. Mm-hmm. Now we have sovereign nations, and individuals in their spiritual quests are looking for the source of their own sovereignty, to stand in their sovereign self, their sovereign power. Well, we view sovereignty as, this is my power, and I'm going to exercise my right to be in the world by showing how powerful I am. Whereas the true expression of the power of who you are is the power of love, not the power of power or the power of domination. That's, I think, where the distortion has gotten in, where it's the glamour of the first ray. Mm-hmm. It's the illusion of what power really means.
Yeah.
So we're dealing with power. I remember way back in the 80s, in the psychosynthesis community, we were looking at, okay, it's one thing to say, how do you and I interact? How do we become loving and kind? But when we're both at a point of trying to understand our own inner power and our own sovereignty, we have to look at the psychoenergetic relationship that happens when the power of who I am meets the power of who you are. And neither of us are free from distortion. Mm. So you get, if you like, a contaminated field of communication between two sources of power, two sources of sovereignty, which in their pure sense would be just be in love with each other. Mm-hmm. But when they're distorted, they're at war with each other.
Yeah, I guess that's kind of the thing is, so that's, one way is, okay, that's a great, almost kind of a banner to put above the door. But once you walk through the door and you walk into the mess that is everyday life, how do we navigate this? So what's, in a practical sense, I mean, we have to navigate it every day in the world. And how does that, from a perspective of trying to be the exemplar of a spiritual kind of community or a spiritual center, we do deal with people from all across the board.
We do. And we had some issues before because the Trans-Himalayan mystery or wisdom tradition that we're part of talks about the indwelling light, that's seeking to be born. And it's been given different names over the millennia. And it at one point was called the Christic light, the Christos, which predates Christianity. But when we use the word Christ or Christos here, I remember a couple of people walked out of a talk because they were from the Jewish faith and they took offense because they didn't understand that what we're talking about, this is the light of your essential divinity we're talking about, not a person. a historical religious person.
Yeah.
And so that's why we say, once you take it down into form, the forms go to war with each other. But when you hold it at the level of principles, the principles just recognize their unity.
Mm.
That's what I'm saying. If I truly understood essential divinity, when I meet you, all I see is another aspect of the love of God meeting another aspect of the love of God, and all that happens is a love affair.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, that's the idea.
Mm-hmm.
But until we get there, we're going to duke it out.
Yeah. Definitely. And that's, yeah, we see that all the time. I guess it does bring up one question that would be is, okay, so we have that as our ideal, and that we have that's sort of our North Star, but I guess there are these questions, and I guess everyone's feeling this on both sides. Everyone I talk to says, I'm from the Midwest, so, I have friends and family all over the country of every different political stripe, from anarchist to it doesn't, and I think one thing I've heard from them say, and this is in their own way, is when does silence become complicity? And especially from how do we discern between spiritual neutrality and sort of moral cowardice?
That's a great, and I think this is where you get the distortion. One can masquerade as the other.
Yeah.
You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
So let's look at silence. Silence is esoterically called the synthesis of all sound. So when you go into the silence, you're going into a place where you can hold all the voices. Not put your fingers in your ear and everything goes quiet. It's a bringing together of all the different voices. At their highest point, they resolve themselves into silence, because silence is the synthesis of all sound. Now, if I look at that in human conditions, my silence is not indifference.
Mm-hmm.
It's my ability to hold the many different voices and not take sides, and not allow one voice to override another. I remember coming up with this exercise I did with groups, where I would invite people were familiar with town hall meetings, where you sort of meet and figure out what you need to do in your community, and there are different voices, and whether they have a religious or political bent to them, there's usually difference of opinion. I said, look, inside yourself, you've got a community of lives. Why don't you call a personal town hall meeting? And so I went through this exercise where you call all the different voices inside of you together, and then you say, okay, I'm going to moderate this on your behalf.
Mm.
So let's hear from who feels strongly about this. What part of, and so this part of Michael is, another part says, yeah, but I'd like to, okay. Then the first thing is to listen to each other and not react. It's active listening, not listening to what somebody's saying so I can start to load my rifle.
Mm-hmm.
I'm listening to understand. And so for me, the silence is the place where I allow things to come together, and I see the intrinsic wholeness, inherent wholeness of everything, and then I see the current temporary disarray and disconnect and discontent that's in the field. And then I hold a place where it can come together. If I'm not holding love and wholeness in my heart, there is no place in which the elements can come together inside of me. Therefore, I cannot radiate out that possibility of wholeness to others.
Mm.
I don't create a living field of possibility.
Right.
So I know it's difficult for people to say, well, you've got to jump in, you've got to say something, you've got to do something. Why are you silent?
Mm.
Well, because silence may be the way to hold the field. And people who have not experienced holding the field as a reality think, what the hell is that person doing? They're not really contributing. And somebody may just be holding the energetic field in which all these different things can play themselves out without self-destructing. Mm-hmm. It's like, if we said before, in the alchemical process, you've got to have a strong crucible. The crucible has to be stronger than the volatile elements you place inside it. So silently holding something is not being, acquiescing to something or being indifferent. it may be a powerful stance of creating a field of possibility that didn't exist there before. All that existed there before was the division. If you only have a split field, how can wholeness take place inside a field that has no exemplar or possibility of wholeness?
Yeah.
It's subtle because, as you said, it can easily masquerade as holier than thou, and its cowardice says, well, I won't take sides, and you step outside the ring. No, we're all inside the ring. But in a ring, remember, in a ring, there are no sides, except for a boxing ring or martial arts ring. There was 4 sides. They called it a ring, but it's really a square. Isn't that strange?
Mm-hmm.
And the square is the symbol of matter.
Mm.
And the ring is the symbol of spirit. The triangle is the spirit of consciousness. So when you place the square, the triangle, and the circle together, you get the Rosicrucian symbol of life. Spirit, soul, and matter in one. Okay, I know, a little esoteric factoid thrown in there, but it talks, we're in the ring together.
Mm-hmm.
We're in the ring, we're in the circle. Now, is the circle unbroken?
Mm.
Who broke the circle? Well, sometimes you have to break the circle if it's a nefarious circle, and you have to lift it through principled living into a spiral. But I think what you and I are saying is that you can't cop out of this fight, but the fight isn't me against. The fight is against the demons of separation and the illusion that we're different.
Yeah.
Well, we're different as far as expressions, but we come from the same source. We are the one source expressing itself and finally meeting itself in the flesh. And then when we see the differences, you go, God, I don't like the look of you.
Yeah.
Well, no, I am you in a different form.
Yeah, I always try to think of it as like, it's just imagining my liver and my lungs arguing with each other. Well, no, you guys do different jobs. It's like
that's why you look different.
Yeah. You're both super important, but you do different jobs. Wait, when you were talking about the silence, I kept having this image of, for me, it comes back to music and how so much of music is the notes you don't play or the silence between the notes. And I was just thinking about a drummer, especially in jazz, where you expect there to be maybe the kick on the 2 and the 4 or the 1 and the 3,
Yeah.
But when they don't play it once, that's when it gets interesting.
Well, it's funny you should mention that because I was listening. I listen a lot to Keith Jarrett, the Keith Jarrett trio with Gary Peacock on bass and Jack DeJohnette on drums. And I was listening to a particular piece yesterday where exactly this happened. His drumming is sublime. He'll have this rolling rhythm, and then suddenly there's the silence where he could have put something.
Mm-hmm.
And there was nothing there, but there was something there because he didn't put it there.
Yeah. Yeah, I think especially this, it's really relevant in the kind of current paradigm we have where everyone seems sort of hell-bent on sharing every fact, feeling, and emotion all the time, 24 hours a day. Sometimes there's real value in just not saying anything.
So if you think that silence is the synthesis of all sound, then music is the revelation of that silence.
Yeah.
And we're told that music and melody come out of rhythm. That's what Agni Yoga tells us. It's the rhythm. It's the pulse of life that then sets in motion the waves, and the waves carry their different frequencies. And as they interact with each other, these different waves, they create these melodies.
Yeah.
These harmonies, harmonic resonance.
Yeah.
I mean,
right. And people, sensitive people can feel that when you are in a place where the energy is not welcoming. And one of the things that silence does is it allows all energies to gather.
Well, see, and for instance, if I'm listening to somebody who's in a rant, I can listen silently, but it isn't I retreat into the cave and block my ears, and I don't even retreat into my mind to listen to them from my mind. I go into my heart and listen with the heart, because the heart can hold the differences and the distinctions without seeing one as good or bad. But these are the current expressions of the one. Now, they may not be pure notes that are being sounded. Some of the notes may be distorted, but they are different notes. And so the original question you had is, well, we officially are a 501c3. We're a nonprofit entity. We're registered as a religious educational charity because that's the only pigeonhole they could find for the work we do here. And we're not supposed to take a political stance. But what we can take is a stance on our principles, where we stand up for that everyone is sacred and should be celebrated and honored. Well, that sounds like affirmative action to me, or whatever you call it. We're affirming affirmative presence. We're affirming the presence of the Creator in every being. And then with goodwill, we're affirming the presence of love in everything. And with the spiritual, the principle of unanimity, we're affirming that we all are part of one coherent field. And therefore, we do take a stance. We do take a position, but a position is not against anything. It's a position that holds everything together and allows the homecoming to take place where the many come back to the one. It may not be seen as, well, you're not out there marching with individually. We have to do what we're called to do and move to do. And if it means carrying a placard in a demonstration, or just silently walking, holding a field of love inside this tense, polarized field, that's, so be it. We have to be moved to do something from within. If it's a reaction on the outside, what it normally does, even though it may feel good in the moment to us, it usually throws more gas on the fire.
Yeah, I think I like the analogy. We've used this many times before, but the concept of a spiritual center being like a lighthouse, and so you can't, your light is there to help guide people and show them where the rocks are, but sometimes people are still going to run into the rocks.
Our job is to help people make more informed choices based on the fact that they are essentially divine and that goodwill. And that we're all part of, on the principle. See, our lighthouse sends out the light of these three principles, saying, look, navigate by these three principles, and you won't be at war with yourself or with other people. Now, it's going to take a while to unravel the tendency to war, because it's so deeply imprinted, the wounds of war, and we know that hurt people tend to hurt people.
Yeah, that's true.
And healed people tend to want to heal.
Also true.
And so therefore we've reached a point where we have to take action. And one of the statements of Agni Yoga is that silence is action. That is an actual sentence from Agni Yoga. Silence is action. Because it's the point that precedes moving into outer engagement.
Yeah, we're just using the musical analogy. I mean, you have there's literally notation for silence in musical score. That's how important it is. So it's I think that's fascinating. That because there's also that thing too that if you have any sort of historical background, if you've read any kind of history, you can see how aligning yourself with any kind of political moment can be kind of a dangerous step, in terms of the spiritual life, because things come and go. Obviously, if you're coming from the perspective of everyone is innately divine spark, that is actually pretty politically radical.
Yes. However, your soul may have as a mission to be a leader of a spiritual of a political party, and therefore it's promoting hopefully a positive aspect that is carried in that political party. But you as a soul have to learn not to identify with that. It's what you've got to carry out in the world. It's not your identity. The problem is when our belief and our polarized belief becomes our identity, then we cling on to that. And there's no way that we can acknowledge wholeness if we are identified with a polarized part. Doesn't mean the polarized parts are wrong. It's when we identify with them as our source of identity rather than this is a temporary point of view.
Yeah, it's kind of disturbing now to see when politics becomes someone's whole personality.
Yeah.
And I think, because in the Bailey teachings, how does political attachment relate to sort of the development of the mental body? It's because there's a lot of things that map onto both the spiritual and the political in a lot of the same ways.
I believe a lot of it goes back to humanity learning the lessons of power.
Yeah, because that power is an interesting word too, because it's in the Great Invocation, and it's sort of a line that it's, even though I know it's coming, it's still kind of a jarring line in the Invocation.
And if I have a political belief, if I see it as a contribution along with other political beliefs, it's one thing. If I see it as needing to win out over everything else in order for something good to happen, then the more perfect union is not possible, because I'm basing the more perfect union on one pole beating out the other pole. Not the two poles coming together to create something that neither pole could create by themselves.
Yeah, that's
that's the difference, Joey. The whole thing of that higher point of resolution at the apex of the triangle, where the baseline of the triangle, you've got the baseline representing the duality and the polarity. Now, as they ascend together, they meet at the apex. They don't lose themselves. They bring their gifts, and then they bring them to a point where something new is fused, is born. But all you can do when you're on the baseline, at best, is negotiate a truce. Or negotiate. And sometimes you negotiate by threatening to hit the other person over the head with a club if they don't do what they say. Whether it's called tariffs or whatever it's called, or arming nations, or it's not. That's not true negotiation. That's just masquerading as bullying. We're not talking about one pole being superior. We're talking about the two poles understanding that they are the dual expression of the one. Therefore, the way that they can replicate that oneness is meeting at a higher point of synthesis. The trend towards a more perfect union. I don't think we fully understand the implications of what it means to seek a more perfect union.
Yeah, that's an interesting point to linger on. What does that mean? And what does that union mean? Do we think, because it does bring the question of because there's a lot of emphasis on the plan and on the hierarchy and things like this. And what does that look like? Does that look like one world government, or does that look like, different pockets of government or different flavors of government?
Let's take this concept of one world government, which is, it's part and parcel of a lot of conspiracy theories. But if you are looking at what Roberto Assagioli dreamt of was the synthesis of nations, is where each nation realizes it's part of a global family of nations, and therefore willingly joins and rejoins the family and brings harmony to the global family of nations. That's not this sort of nefarious one world government where someone behind the scenes is manipulating the puppets on the stage for their own benefit. This is a genuine coming together of all the parts at a higher level of synthesis. But one world government is this fear of somebody imposing. You can't impose wholeness. And what is the fear of the one world government is that one part will impose its ideology on the whole world and call it one world government. That is not unity. That is global dictatorship, which is different from the synthesis of nations.
Okay.
Because in the synthesis of nations, what Roberto Assagioli said, each nation has a soul. That soul is to be honored as bringing a gift. Now, those souls are simply the rainbow expressions of the great soul of humanity, the different colors. When they come together, what do they form? They form this rainbow coalition of nations. And what is the rainbow? The rainbow is a synthesis or an expression of the white light.
Mm-hmm.
So the white light is a synthesis of all colors, just as silence is a synthesis of all sound.
Yeah.
So you can have the negative side of a one world government, where it really is just an expanded dictatorship, or you can have it come as coming together of a true communion of respect and love between nations, where you understand the gift of each nation, its culture, its people, and you realize that these are just the different colors of the spectrum of our one humanity. So the fear there is the fear of domination, because, hey, once bitten, twice shy. We've been bitten so many times by people who have promised, goodness for all and ended up being dictators.
Yeah. I think that there's a lot of revelation that's happening right now on every color side of the political aisle right now. Just with the sort of the nature of the data-driven kind of world that we live in, more and more stuff is being revealed, and you're realizing, everyone's selling everyone out.
The snake oil salesperson.
Yeah.
Whereas the snake, even though it can be the asp that can poison and kill you, it's also the serpent of wisdom. And if you look at the symbol of the physician and of the health, it is, if you like, a staff with these two coiled serpents around it.
Yeah.
Which really represent the two aspects of the thread of consciousness and the life thread around the spine. So it's really talking about the balance of these two forces in nature. We go deep. When you really understand the original symbols that you use, that's it. The two intertwined serpents around a staff represent health. How did that happen? Well, it's when the two components, the two snakes, aspire to spiral and evolve together up this sort of pole, which is the spine or the direction of evolution, you have health. And what is health? It's wholeness. So I guess we're at a state now where we're experiencing more of a disunity than a unity. And there are some people who are afraid of a civil war, which really means the fragmentation of a union.
Yeah. I personally don't worry too much about that. But it's just, I guess for me, it's like when we look at this sort of political alignments and as a form of glamour, and it can be like distracting from your soul purpose. Like, so, how, like with, the Bailey vision or the DK's vision of a new group of world servers as sort of a nonpartisan force.
It's nonpartisan, but what it's asked to do is to bring in the power of love and the power of unity into the world. That because there is an affirmation, the affirmation of unity, and there's a whole mantra of unification that is used. So it affirms the oneness. So what the new group of world servers, all the people who are seeking to create this world that is more whole and healthy, is where, first of all, you've got to create the conditions in which the seeds can germinate. You've always got the seeds that carry the promise, but the seeds, if they just fall on stony ground, as the Bible says, are not going to grow. So the workers in the fields have got two things to do. One is to sow the seeds of the principles and the promise, but they have to cultivate the ground so that it can actually be nutrient-rich and sufficiently fertile to allow the seeds to quicken and to grow and to flourish. And that's the task we have. And at the moment, we've got a lot of weeds in the ground. We've got a lot of invasive species that are choking out the new growth. And that's why you've got to clear the space for the new. What's happening at the moment is a dissolution of a certain order, because it's not held together by the true glue of the universe, which is love.
Yeah.
And the principle of unanimity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I like I always love the sort of gardening and planting metaphors, because I think of what we're doing as sort of planting the seeds for trees that we'll never sit under, but
Exactly.
it's worthwhile and necessary work, you know.
And that's because we're not attached to, I've got to plant my tree and it's my tree. No, this is a tree that is needed in the garden of humanity.
Mm-hmm.
Let us plant it so that our future sisters and brothers, and by the way, I may even be reincarnated at that time. I may even get to sit under the tree I planted, if you understand the cycles of reincarnation. So let's not say that you never get to sit under the tree, Joey.
Touche.
It may be that you could,
mm-hmm.
and maybe people already have done this.
Mm.
You may have sat under a tree that you in some other lifetime planted. Who knows?
That's a lovely idea. I love that. You know?
So it's
Yeah.
being divinely selfish.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
As the one self.
Yeah.
It's when you're divinely selfish as the separated self
mm-hmm.
is the problem.
Yeah, I mean, on a very small scale, I think about that as, one of the things I do is when I make food is I try to wash all the dishes I use before I start eating. And I think of it as I'm hooking my future self up, even though that future self might only be my 15-minute away self. But it's like, it's in that same kind of thing. And if you think of ourselves as the whole, and these incarnations of humanity are just little sparks in the whole cosmic,
Right.
The whole cosmic everything. And we're only here for a brief moment, but we're persistent in that sense. This consciousness, this thing that persists.
Well, and I'm a great bird watcher. I love watching the birds, and I know that the birds have got two wings, and they need two wings to fly. And you think sometimes with the political parties that there are people that believe you can have a one-winged bird.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
it's just going to spiral down and crash into the ground eventually.
Yeah, and that seems to historically play itself out. And I think that's actually a great analogy for how we can get ourselves in trouble when we make politics too big of a part of our life. Because you have to still realize that you are the bird. You need both of those wings in whatever way you want to look at it. A battery has a positive and a negative.
Yes. And I think what we are running into is that at the moment, we're not seeing the demonstration of the higher aspect or the positive aspect of each of the poles.
Mm-hmm.
So that when I look at the downside, all I see is what's wrong with that pole. I don't see what it brings to the table, the gift it brings. Mm-hmm. So until we realize what gift the other party brings, and that if I put my gift with your gift, and if we meet at the top of the mountain and pool our gifts, we actually do stand a good chance of creating a more perfect union. But if we go back to what we said in the beginning of this podcast, if it's just one pole beating out another pole, you can't have creation with one pole. Yeah. That becomes a monoculture. Mm-hmm. That becomes a dictatorship. In a dictatorship, you are not allowed to be different. And if there are no differences, there's no polarization. If there's no polarization, there's no tension. If there's no tension, there's crisis. If there's no crisis, there's no creative release of new things. We have to have tension in the field. But we see tension as war, not the dynamics of creativity. We're wired for war, not for creation, Joey.
Yeah, that's true.
So what else comes to mind in this? I know we've wandered around the field on this one, but did you have other ideas or other doors you wanted to open in this conversation?
Well, for me, I think, and I think I've said this on this podcast before, but I come from the Midwest, and I come from the middle of the Midwest. I was born and raised in St. Louis, Missouri. And when you come from that part of the world, it doesn't matter if it's your dinner table or your classroom or your work. You have people from all walks of life. And, one of the things that you learn growing up in that environment is how to talk to people of all different kinds of people. And one of the things I think that I sort of lament about our current situation is that we've decided that it's okay to stop having those conversations. It's like, I can't have that person over for dinner because they voted for that person, or
Right.
I can't, I can't talk to my parents anymore because they voted for the guy, and like,
Yeah.
and I see that almost like it's almost like rampant out here. Sometimes in California, we can be very, very, just very vicious about who is okay and who isn't.
Yeah.
And I just sort of I see it as one of the things about a spiritual space, and whether that space is inside of you or a physical space like Meditation Mount, is you sort of set the table and you invite everyone to show up.
And what you said is that you come together and you talk with each other. I think at the moment we're talking at each other.
Yeah.
That's the difference, Joey.
Mhm.
We're not talking with each other, we're talking at each other.
And that's where the importance of silence comes in, is because people realize that if you're going to talk with someone, you have to have that silence. You have to allow the other person to talk. And I think there's great tools for that. I think one of the things you can do is the steel man technique.
Yeah.
We've talked about that in this podcast, where you give a good faith, a good faith you show the other person's argument in good faith, and give it a chance. And one of the things you can do, one of the things that you can do with the silence, is to allow those different instruments to play.
Without having in your mind, oh, I think that's a load of whatever, or I don't agree with it. Silence means not passing judgment on what you're hearing.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you're contaminating the inner field with opposing thoughts.
Yeah.
You're sending up your Patriot missiles to take out whatever the incoming is, or whatever warlike analogy you want to conjure up.
Yeah.
But the silence can be the receptive listening. And then you say, hey, this is what I believe I heard you say, just to check. Is this what I heard you say? Thank you. Not, I don't agree with what you just said, but this is what I believe I heard you say.
Yeah.
And you're just checking, and somebody says, yeah. So the problem we're facing at the moment is that whenever we identify with anything that is a part, we become a part. We become a part from the whole. The part becomes a part. You join A and part together, it becomes a part. It becomes separateness. It doesn't mean you can't have distinctions, but the distinctions is a way of showing the variety and beauty of the one. They are not the different factions in a war. And I guess we've said this several different ways in this particular episode, but when I look at what's happening in the world, if I get rid of the fear, if I start to look at, well, what am I afraid of in that other person? What does the other mean to me? They represent what? I'm afraid of them because they represent this. And I realize that their culture, as far as they're concerned, I represent to them a greater threat. We all perceive each other as representing a threat to something that we hold dear, rather than each of us brings a piece of the puzzle that when we put it together, we get this fully interlocking picture of who we are. Rather than we're going to make our puzzle piece the whole puzzle. It's not a one-piece puzzle. This is a 1,000-piece circular white puzzle that we're putting together.
Yeah.
With many colors.
Yeah.
So I don't know what else.
No, I was just bringing up there's a great meme, and it has it's a picture, and it shows like on the right side it shows missiles being shot through the air, and on the left side missiles being shot to intercept those missiles, and one side is labeled my tax dollars at work, and the other side is labeled somehow also my tax dollars at work. And I was thinking about that, like for your own personal self, that those tax dollars are your energy. Everyone is allotted so much energy in this life. Really, that's it. And when the energy is done, your time is done. So spend that energy wisely instead of fueling both sides of a war. Whether it's politics, religion, whatever it is. you're just expending energy, like sort of shooting at yourself.
Well, and at a deeper spiritual level, there is a limitless source of energy.
Yeah.
And what we're doing, in fact, is taxing each other's patience.
Yeah.
And then impatience leads to irritability. Irritability leads to poison, as the Agni Yoga teachings say, imperil. It's an actual chemical precipitate that enters into the blood, which contaminates everything.
Yeah.
So irritation ends up as this very dangerous poison. And therefore, that doesn't bring wholeness and healing. So in our attempt to heal the world and make it whole by dominating, have our position dominate the other, we're actually creating a greater state of sickness for the future. Under the illusion that health and wholeness is when what I believe is what everyone believes.
Yeah. All right.
Okay, so from monoculture, let us go back to this multicultural expression of life. We've got to go back to multicultural living on the planet.
Back to regenerative farming.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
No pesticides, which is no poisonous thinking, no poisonous action.
Yeah. Proper crop rotation and proper mixing of plants that feed each other.
Right.
Yeah.
And let's live in rhythm with the soul and reveal the beauty of the soul through each unique gift. And it's going to take a long time to eradicate war. You can only eradicate war when you hold a vision that all the parts make up a whole. If I still see, if my vision of the world is eventually my part will dominate and the world will be better because it will believe what I believe and what I believe is the best, that is just promoting cancer into the future for our society. So politics should not be the cause of global cancer. It should be the way in which we, once again, it's how we choose to live together and govern ourselves from the deepest place of our being, from our own sovereign self as individuals, our own sovereign self as a nation, our own sovereign self as one humanity within the sovereignty of the planet. So sovereignty doesn't mean separation. Sovereignty means that each aspect is essentially divine. But when we acknowledge that and bring all the essentially divine aspects back together, we get a greater expression of divinity in action. In fact, we get a more perfect union.
All right. Thank you, Michael. That was a great place to wrap it. And see you next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Jerry.